It's really our pleasure to be here today and present sort of our observations and our suggestions about the situation, about the financial precarity, the reality of doctoral studies. As mentioned, this is a commentary article that we have put together, and we'll really dive into the context on how it came to be and what we found out. So thank you for the Center for Research on Educational and Community Services for hosting us today, as well as the support of the Faculty of Education at the University of Ottawa, where we published our paper in their publication, The Education Review, and as well as support of the Graduate Students Association of the Faculty of Education, who also supported the publication process.
Also, special thanks to Professor Jess Whitley, who stuck with us through this project. It was it was a rough path for everyone involved, but we really appreciate her support specifically. Shall we get started?
Yep.
All right. Okay, we're going to start with land acknowledgements. We pay respects to the Algonquin people, who are the traditional guardians of this land. We acknowledge their long-standing relationship with this territory, which remains unceded. We pay respect to all Indigenous people in this region from all nations across Canada who call Ottawa home. We acknowledge the traditional knowledge keepers, both young and old, and we honor their courageous leaders, past, present, and future.
We both study at the University of Ottawa. Shaily does live in Ottawa, quite close to the university, but I actually live outside of the National Capital Region and near Napanee, Ontario, and conduct my studies and research mostly remotely from here. So I thought I'd also add a land acknowledgement from where I'm coming from. And I'd like to sort of state that Napanee is the traditional territory of the Wendat, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee peoples on the banks of Lake Ontario. And it's also a community, Napanee is also a community that's directly adjacent to the vibrant Kanekanaha Mohawk community of Tyendinaga. And so there's a lot of pollination of cultures and knowledge that happens in the region between, let's just say, sort of Brockville, Kingston, Napanee, Tyendinaga, and Belleville. So it's an interesting region from that perspective as well, with a very interesting history, which I don't have time to go through today, but it's something if you're interested in to look up. So for today's presentation, we're going to introduce ourselves. I'm going to contextualize actually how we came about to publishing our paper in the Education Review and why we did that. And then we will meet together, discuss our commentary article, going over the background, context, our approach or method, our themes, discussion, and we'll close out with a question and answer period, a general discussion, which we're very excited for.
If you're interested in viewing the issue or our article, you can do so by scanning the QR code on your screen. The article is available to everyone for free.
A little bit about ourselves. So I am, I guess, a third year PhD candidate. I think Shaily and I are slightly in different positions, even though we started at the same time, because I just came back from a 1-year maternity leave, and I'm working in the areas of health professions education for family, specifically for family doctors, and how we can meet our truth and reconciliation responsibility as non-Indigenous health providers and improving the relationships with Indigenous patients. I come at this from a background studying the sciences and also from a professional experience of being an instructional designer in health science disciplines at the post-secondary level.
I am in my 4th year, so this is my 4th year. Well, 2025 is my 4th year. I'm almost finished with my thesis, waiting for some feedback from my supervisor. My area of expertise are educational technologies, specifically pertaining to language training. This particular article comes from a place of, I guess, intersectionality. between being a professional person working in academia as well as being a graduate student. And we'll get into that a little bit more later on, but the journey of being a graduate student is not easy for everyone. So this is where the passion for this particular article comes from. Oh, and as Taylor introduced us at the beginning, I have the honor of being your graduate director at the board of directors in GSAD, which is your graduate student association, as well as your representative to the programs committee at the Faculty of Education.
All right, so before we go into our actual article, I wanted to describe the context and the publication within which we actually published the article, because that's also really important and an element that actually strengthened all the connections we had with our peers as we were writing the article and at the same time going through our graduate studies journey. So when Shaily and I entered the PhD program in education, it was fall 2021, and the university was still in the midst of sort of COVID-19 pandemic emergency online virtual learning. So we actually completed all our required courses in our first year online virtually. And for our mandatory courses, we actually had weekly synchronous sessions where we'd get together with the professor and our peers and discuss course concepts and have small group and large group discussions. And through this experience, we actually developed really strong connections with each other. We learned not only about our various professional and educational experiences and educational knowledge, but we also learned a lot about each other personally. And so we actually, as a cohort, we created a WhatsApp group to maintain those connections beyond just the academic classroom, and that really strengthened the sense of our community. So I and another peer colleague in our cohort, Daria, we actually thought up of the idea of maybe collecting the stories that we were hearing in the classroom and beyond into sort of the academic literature space. And we found that the Faculty of Education had the education review, and we petitioned, we provided a proposal to the faculty to take over, quote unquote, as co-editors, a student-led edition of the journal. And so at the end of the day, we ended up collecting 10 articles from 13 peer authors and 1 faculty reflection. And our goal with these articles was to take advantage of this caring and authentic community that we had built and critically evaluate the positive and challenging aspects of the system. And this was an exercise where we were really writing for ourselves and our peers, but also for a wide range of audiences. So maybe future PhD applicants, university administrators, and faculty members. And we wanted to make the collection of articles as accessible as possible. So a lot of the articles are from the lived experiences of these doctoral students, written sometimes with a formal sort of research approach, but oftentimes from an informal kind of storytelling perspective. And across these 10 articles, some 5 key themes emerged. The first of which was the importance of building a community, especially as a PhD student, where the experience can be quite isolating if you're not intentional about building that community. We had a number of articles exploring how it is to navigate a new community and identity and responsibilities as a PhD student, whether you have been out of academia for a long time, or you're an international student, or first time entry, like first in your family, for example, to pursue a PhD studies. We had a few articles navigating and providing tips about the academic process, the comprehensive exam, and thinking about the research proposal and how to approach that. There's a few articles about how to rebuild an academic professional identity or trajectory based on personal and professional background and joining the doctoral studies program at different phases of life, particularly mid to late career, and a lot of reflections about sort of the contemporary realities of conducting graduate studies, which is where our article really focuses on. But if you are interested in these topics, I highly recommend reading the edition of the Education Review, spring 2024.
To bring you a little bit into what we were actually talking about in this particular article, we call it Welcome to the Problem. We are going to talk about the financial instability amongst doctoral students. It is a present and pressing issue. It affects everyone's who is involved, their academic success, their career path, and their mental health. And often, while not mentioned here, often their personal and family life as well. And one of the things that affects this majorly is the rising cost of education, first of all, and then reduced funding opportunities, which exacerbate this problem. And it leads to other challenges, such as increased stress and anxiety, limited access to essential academic sources, and need for the students to work multiple external jobs outside of university to be able to support themselves, which distracts them from being able to commit themselves fully to research.
So we really wanted to shed light on these realities by interrogating the lived experiences of current students to really come forward with some suggestions on how these gaps and challenges can be addressed. And we'll discuss these in the presentation.
A brief review of literature, or as we call it, looking through the looking glass. Because this particular article is written from like a narrative and experiential perspective, we didn't want to make it extremely formal and sciencey in a sense, but we still wanted to ensure that we were not the only ones talking about this, and there was an actual research behind what we were talking about. So we presented a few other articles that talk about challenges of being doctoral students, social challenges, emotional challenges, financial challenges, and surprisingly, food challenges, being able to provide yourself with the basic necessities to survive as a graduate student and how that would impact your well-being mentally and physically as a researcher. It's rough to say, but marginalized groups, and specifically international students, are in a more vulnerable position to be affected by these challenges than domestic students, simply because they lack the structural supports that exist for domestic students. So racialized communities, non-traditional, international, and marginalized groups, and low-income groups are the ones that are most affected by these problems. The key challenges that were identified in the review of literature for us were the rising tuition fees, which forces the students to prioritize tuition and housing over essentials like food, like healthcare, like mental health care. And this highlights the risks of basic needs insecurities. Financial struggles are somehow normalized and romanticized in academia, which we found very discouraging, because this means that students somehow expect to be underpaid and overworked, and they expect to not have financial stability. They expect to go through hardships because that's what they believe is expected of them as graduate students, as rising scholars, and people pursuing a career in academia. There were economic pressures such as reduced public fundings, stagnant wages, inflation, which never matches the rise in wages, and other hardships pertaining specifically to wage and external funding. And the impacts it has on students were obviously financial insecurity, which causes anxiety, shame, isolation, and it impedes social integration, because in a hierarchy of needs, basic needs come before social interaction. And also disparities in resources and well-being among students, which highlights a pressing need for systematic reforms of how students are treated and how these particular issues are discussed among students and faculty alike.
now that we have a bit of context, we want to sort of bring to light how we actually came about to documenting the lived experiences that are found in our article. And so, as I mentioned previously in the discussion about the Education Review as a whole, as a publication, our cohort, the fall 2021 English Education PhD cohort at the University of Ottawa, we had actually built quite a strong community through first our virtual synchronous mandatory first year courses, but beyond. And we regularly, multiple times a week, people put in chats, questions about academic processes, how people applied for certain conferences or grants, or just personal questions about if anyone knows a cheap place to rent in the Ottawa area, for example. So this community was, and this sense of community was our starting point. And as I mentioned, we also had a lot like these academic and personal discussions. Shaily and I are just naturally quite extroverted, so we're always involved in these conversations somehow. We're really passionate about advocating for graduate students' rights and improving the graduate student experience. So that factored in with our sort of positionality, our personal locations, our various privileges, both personal, academic, and professional, made us really comfortable to act as sort of the face of the community. Some graduate students are very vulnerable in their positions, especially if they're looking to pursue academic positions after they graduate from their PhD studies. They have to be very careful about how they present themselves to the community. For a number of reasons, Shaily and I felt comfortable to be the voice of everyone on their behalf. And luckily, people were very receptive to that. Again, we have developed these strong connections with our cohort. We came to learn about not necessarily people's very intimate details of people's financial situations, but through our conversations about TA applications and grants and knowing if a student was a international student, domestic student, and a little bit about their personal situation, we kind of started to see some trends, and we also knew about their dispositions, and that would allow us to sort of approach them to participate in the study if we thought it was appropriate. And so we decided to focus our article on our own cohort, the English stream of the 2021 Education PhD. And we ended up reaching out to 9 of our peers we thought were interested in sharing their experience because they had previously been open about sharing information about themselves in the past. We were very aware of the sensitive nature of the types of information people would be sharing. So we mutually agreed that any information would be shared anonymously, but we would retain their quotes in full so that their lived experience was reflected appropriately and shared in their own words. And that presented a really sort of comfortable space for people to be able to participate in sort of these discussions. In the end of the day, we were able to get 8 positive indications of participation. One person did exclude because they found their personal situation to be really well supported from a financial perspective. They had full support from their family, friends, workplace, and they didn't feel like their lived experience would be helpful for our particular context. And one person ended up being too busy to participate in the end. And in our piece, we ended up pulling these lived experience quotes into the paper, but also interspersing sort of our ongoing observations of graduate student life, not only exclusively with our cohort, but what we've seen over our time in the program. I think that will lead us to our next section.
What we learned from the shared experiences that we personally had and also those of our cohorts came down to three major themes. Now, bear in mind that the people that we asked to share their narratives with us basically did so in the long monologue type of writing, and we selected chunks from their correspondence with us. And then based on that, these themes have emerged. So one was the decision leading to do a PhD for them. We'll discuss these further in the presentation, but like what made them want to do a PhD in the first place? And the other thing was the 10-hour per week rule for full-time students, because that's how much you're allowed to work as a full-time registered student. And it comes with its own challenges, which we will discuss. And then frustrations with getting teaching assistantship or research assistantship. Also noteworthy is that when we wrote these narratives of our experiences, we were just finishing our first year into the PhD. So obviously, as you progress through the system and if things go smoothly, you'll start feeling a little bit less pressure. But at the beginning, you are just like a budding scholar. You're starting out. Everything is so much more difficult, which may or may not become easier as you go along. But that's like a dependent on a lot of external factors as well, which we will discuss. But just to let you know, these are the themes that we will be discussing in the next slides. And we could not include everybody's quotes on every single topic. So we've chosen a single quote per topic to represent what the general feel about that topic might have been.
So the first theme is regarding the decision process leading to do a PhD. In order to enter the PhD program in education, you need to have a master's level qualification. It doesn't have to be in education. For example, for myself, my previous degrees are in the sciences, but a theme, the general theme that we heard from participants was the primary focus is to really improve your earning potential, your ability to secure employment, and PhD is sort of one of the first things people sort of envision in that process. And for a lot of people, there's a lot of things to consider when making that decision. Some people enter the PhD without really considering the financial aspect and sort of trust that the process will kind of figure itself out. But a lot of what we were hearing was that within the early stages of the program, budgeting becomes a requirement, a high stress point. Especially because in the first year, you are required to attend all your courses. You have to be successful in your coursework in order to be successful in the next step, which is the comprehensive exam, and secure your place in the program. There are a lot of conflicts in the ability to maintain stable employment. And if you're not experienced with the system, it's not immediately clear where you can receive funds from, for example, like how to apply for a TA-ship, how to apply for a grant. You don't have a research proposal that you could use to support a grant application yet. So there becomes a need to become more creative in budgeting. And some students have to rely on their partners or their families for their income during this time. Some people have to leave their full-time jobs temporarily or permanently and develop different ways of getting an income, perhaps through casual employment. So the admission scholarship that the Faculty of Education offers to students is actually one of the key factors in some students' decision-making process in actually doing a PhD program. A lot of people discuss how without this scholarship, the PhD would actually be out of reach and they would not consider it as an option in the first place. And then the need to have guaranteed teaching assistants and research assistant positions as part of this scholarship is very important. So the way it works in the Faculty of Education is there's a portion that pays for tuition every semester. And then the student is also guaranteed, if they apply, 2 positions within the 3 semester term system. So they would be guaranteed a job either in 2 of the 3 semesters in an academic year, I should say. As well, that really leads us to sort of the really important role of the institution in supporting and enabling access to the doctoral program in the first place, because many students would not actually pursue a PhD without this support.
So another point of concern for people was the 10-hour per week rule. So as we mentioned, having a scholarship was one of the greatest sources of support for the students, and one of the major elements that affect their decision in pursuing a PhD. So a lot of people mention that if they didn't have a scholarship, they would not pursue a PhD, as it is a financial strain for them and for their families. So having the scholarship as a source of support actually helps. However, it also restricts their working conditions to 170 to 200 hours per semester. That is a 10-hour per week working hours, which is not enough to support anyone's living in the current economy when with the 8% inflation that comes every year. And also non-compliance with this rule risks losing your scholarship. I don't know how familiar everyone is with the scholarship situation, but there is 3 types of scholarships that are offered. One is the domestic doctoral admission scholarship, which pays for your tuition for, I believe, 4 years consecutively. So 3 semesters per year for 4 years. And then also it guarantees you work under 170 hours as a teaching assistant or a research assistant for 2 out of the 3 semesters. So it's usually the fall and the winter semester, and then you don't really get anything for the summer semester. There is fewer registration for the summer semester, so handing out contracts for that period is much, much more complicated. And then there is 2 different ones for international students. There is one that lowers their tuition from international to domestic, and then pays that. I don't know if you're aware, but international tuition is almost 3 times what the domestics pay for tuition. So that is actually a great source of help for them, reducing it to the domestic amount. And then there is the other one that, in addition to lowering the domestic tuition, it also guarantees them work for 2 semesters out of 3, which also people found to be quite a source of support. However, the 10-hour rule really restricts how much they're able to work to support themselves. The conversations that we had with our peers revealed that to overcome the financial precarity that arises from being a graduate student and being limited in how much you can work within the university, they have to come up with creative strategies to meet family and personal obligations. I mean, we are adult students, we have families to support, we have, personal lives that cost money. Even rent, food, very basic needs require us to pay for it. A lot of them were saying that they took part-time or full-time jobs outside of the university, and they were skeptical on whether they should be disclosing this information to the employer, which is the university, or their supervisor, because the attitudes of the supervisors towards the students getting external jobs varied based on their personal view and their personal experiences. Some supervisors were okay with it. They were like, do what you got to do to support yourself and get through this. And some supervisors were like, no, you have to 100% commit your time and energy to this research, and you are not allowed to work more than it takes your time away from research. A lot of them were a little on the scared side to discuss this with their employers or with their supervisors. And it's understandable because their entire academic life hangs in the balance at this point. And so this was something that people were reluctant to talk about. The beginning of the PhD process is difficult for people because you have a lot of coursework to complete, and you have to attend courses, at least 2 per semester for 2 semesters. So the need for them to physically be in a classroom In our case, we were online, but still our presence was required. And the coursework that needs completing, it's a lot of demand on their time. So it's a lot of strict scheduling, which limits how much they can work outside of that and pursue like independent work outside of university. However, as we transition into independent research, so post comps, post proposal defense, students have a lot more flexibility with their time and how they can manage it to multiple commitments. And this is where they mentioned that they really considered getting full-time jobs, in fact, to be able to support themselves and their families, especially our international students, as their costs are much higher because they're not already established here. They don't have a family and support structure. They're making one out of scratch. So they really need that kind of financial support. So this was something that they mentioned helped having the flexibility after finishing coursework to be able to dedicate their time to something outside of research.
The final theme was the frustrations with the TA process. And essentially what it boils down to is that for all students, but especially for those who have those quote unquote guaranteed spots for TA or RA positions, the process is still very opaque and time consuming. And before, especially in the first years of graduate studies, many students don't have existing relationships with any faculty or an understanding of the bureaucratic process. And we heard from students who would apply to multiple positions every semester and not be successful, but not really hear back on perhaps why they weren't successful, whether it's simply a matter of seniority or perhaps the employer already had someone in mind for a position, but not receiving feedback in a timely manner really put people into a hard position because they would apply to many positions, assuming they would be successful in receiving at least one contract. But if that doesn't materialize or takes 1 or 2 months into the semester, for example, if you apply for positions starting in September or October, you don't find out for a month or two, that kind of forces the student to really need to pivot on a short notice and find alternate means of raising money for themselves, whether it's internal or external to the university. Some people really just gave up on the process. It just became too stressful to consistently apply and not receive contracts or feedback on how they should adjust their application process and just pursue something external that is more dependable in terms of receiving a regular income. And some have to have backup plans on deck, which isn't always feasible should they not receive a contract. And then while others over the years we have seen, it's not really reflected in our article because we're only talking about the first year, but as you progress through the years of the program, you develop relationships with professors and researchers who get to know your work and your quality of your work, and then they're more willing to hire you in the future. But especially in those early years of the program, it's very stressful to not know where your income is going to come from. And so there's this sort of overall level of frustration with the process. Everyone understands there's a bureaucracy and administrative processes that need to be followed, and the people who do the hiring need to ensure people are competent to be able to complete the roles that they're hired from. But the opaqueness of the process really creates a lot of anxiety and stress that could be mitigated if things are more transparent. And it kind of also forces the PhD journey into a state where it depends, your success on an income sort of depends on independent wealth or just enduring poverty, which is really an inequitable system. But at the same time, earlier we talked about the romanticization about sort of being a poor academic, there is a willingness and a sense of gratitude and relief when participants were provided with the opportunity to share their experiences and their stories. People do want to share their experiences in order to improve them, but the environment to do so needs to be carefully constructed so people are safe, not only mentally and emotionally, but from a professional and career advancement perspective, because their future careers could be on the line based on simply their reputation. And as a society, we don't really like to talk about how we make our money, how much money we may or may not have, and kind of fits into sort of a vulnerable piece there. It's also a little bit challenging because there is high employment rates among PhD graduates, and certain economic conditions do exacerbate that. So it's students are making sacrifices, whether putting off full-time employment or other career goals, pausing other career goals by completing graduate studies. So universities should be really focusing on, providing more career support, and so that students can understand what opportunities there could be or how they could leverage their doctoral studies in different fields, not just for those limited professor positions.
We do like to also iterate that processes have changed since we wrote and published this article, and it's not easier, it's just different now.
And now we wanted to have just like a sort of a last discussion about this topic, using sort of our inferred observations. Not all of these observations are actually present in the article, but things that we've come to appreciate over the time of when the idea of this article is review process and publishing happened, and to this day, and that we think are relevant to the sort of ideas of financial precarity during graduate studies. So I think it's important to know the importance and the protective effect, mental, emotional, social, that the strength of the peer community and the broader academic community and their supports can have. I think just the act of creating a WhatsApp group where we could connect with our peers on an ongoing basis, on ad hoc basis, on a voluntary basis, has really helped a lot of our peers, and myself included, navigate the different aspects of the graduate student experience and understand that we're not going through unique experiences. There are common things that we're all going through to varying degrees, and we can learn from each other, support each other, provide links to resources or policies that might, or organizations that might help us advocate for ourselves as we navigate different challenges within graduate studies. And we really appreciated the opportunity to have another avenue to advocate for our peers, both present and future, and learning from the past experiences of others. And we're really fortunate to be in a position to do so and show that vulnerability, but feel safe in doing so in such a public way.
We also found out that experiences amongst our peers and cohorts vary greatly based on whether they're a domestic student or an international student. Clearly, international students are struggling a lot more financially as well as emotionally because their support structures are not here. Even if they have migrated here with their families, it's often just like the nuclear family unit, and they don't have the support of their extended family and friends. So they suffer a lot more than our domestic students do. That's not to undermine what domestic students are going through, just that it's harder for international students and a lot more expensive. Stages of life affect this experience as well. And we're not just talking about age at this point, although those of our cohorts that have been away from studies for an extended period of time and have decided to return to pursue a higher degree did seem to find it a lot more difficult to navigate academia than those of our colleagues that were continuing with their education without much of a break between the degrees. And it's only because the nature and the culture of academia is changing and adapting to a new culture and finding a new identity within that culture becomes a little more difficult. And also there were natural stages of life for us, at least. We had in our cohorts alone, we had people going through divorce, we had people getting married, we had people having children, we had single parents who were supporting their children on their own. We had people who had established careers and were pursuing degrees only to be able to advance in that career. So these experiences really affected how people felt and went through the journey. And this, we cannot stress this enough. Supervising culture. I I had the pleasure and the honor of being the PhD representative for the Anglophone cohorts for the first 3 years of my being a PhD student at this faculty. I have had to relinquish that responsibility to Pierre Ferrosier this year for personal reasons. But the amount of, I don't want to say complaints, but just disappointments that people went through and would discuss with me to bring to the faculty's attention or bring it to the graduate program's attention was overwhelming. I would say the most important thing that affects a student's PhD journey is who their supervisor is and what their relationship is. Because some of us were lucky enough to have amazing, supportive supervisors who really looked out for us in our academic journey as well as in our personal lives. They understood that we're human. We go through human events in our lives. We have family obligations. We have personal things to deal with. And they really cared for us. They cared for our mental well-being as well as our academic well-being. And then some people had a little more hands-off type of supervision where they just felt like their supervisor was just some authoritative figure that they would sometimes submit stuff to, and they didn't really have a good relationship, which meant they did not feel supported in their journey. And then at times, though it pains me to say, there were some major conflicts between the student and the supervisor. So having a good relationship and having a supervisor that's supportive really affects the PhD journey. And another thing was importance of support structures at home as well as at school. So yes, you can be supported by your professors, by your supervisors, by your employers in the university. You can have all the support structures in place. You can have representatives that speak for you, that advocate for you, that are your voice. But you need that home support as well. You need people in your lives that understand what you're going through, that are easy to speak to when you come to that moment of like, I'm burnt out, I need help, and who are potentially willing to support you financially as well as emotionally to finish this, because getting a PhD is a long-term investment. While you're doing it, you do not have the means to support yourself sometimes, but it is a long-term investment. You have the potential, you're accumulating the potential to earn more, to do better. But in order to do that, you need someone to hold your hand while you're doing it. So this is very important as well.
The final point, communication between the different structures at the university is paramount. So to reemphasize, the communication between peers in a cohort is like really paramount for the social, emotional strength aspect of doing the graduate studies, but also across cohorts can be really helpful, but that's sometimes difficult because it's difficult to connect across sort of the cohort years and learn from the sort of more senior graduate students, as well as ensuring that the student associations are well staffed, quote unquote, by volunteers who have the capacity to do the extracurricular work to advocate for their peers, as well as the communication between administration and faculty and those student-led organizations and structures beyond just the student union, but the student associations, ombudsman offices, and so on and so forth. Those can be real. Strengthening those connections can really help sort of flatten these sort of mountainous, challenging aspects of graduate studies, financial or otherwise. And then to wrap up, we'll be pretty brief, but we wanted to share some final thoughts about what we learned and what we still need to learn. We believe it's essential for higher education institutions to prioritize alleviating financial precarity among PhD students in order to create a more equitable, inclusive, and supportive academic environment. And in order to do so, like expanding scholarship opportunities and funding, focusing on marginalized students, creating transparent, equitable processes for teaching and research assistantships, and developing financial literacy programs to guide students in managing finances are some first steps. They're not the only steps, but they can do a lot to really allowing the student to really focus on what matters in the degree program, which is their academic progress, their academic excellence, rather than on their financial situation. And creating a culture of open dialogue around financial struggles is also something that we think is key. There is a willingness to share, but there is stigma surrounding financial struggles. So creating that environment that allows for people to be safe and vulnerable and sharing this information without it having impact on future career aspirations.
And finally, collaboration with external organizations and government agencies can also further expand the support that's available. Research into intersectionality of identities and financial challenges, as well as the long-term impact of financial precarity on career outcomes, can help shape a more effective policies to put in place for the students. We call on researchers, practitioners, and institutions to continue exploring these issues and challenge the existing structures that perpetuate inequality. By addressing financial precarity in higher education institutions, these institutions can foster an environment where PhD students are supported to better thrive academically and personally.
We want to thank you for our presentation. We really thought it was an important topic to discuss and share about. And I know we went a little bit over than what we were expecting, but hopefully it provided some insights for those of you who are currently in graduate studies or overseeing the processes of graduate studies through faculty and administrative roles. We thank you for your time today.